Welcome to Around Aretuza, and with me here today is CheddarPaul. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
No, always a pleasure. So, what have you been up to? I've seen you've been streaming The Last of Us 2.
Yeah, I've been obviously with how Gwent is at the moment, it was like, do you know what? I've been streaming this for nearly a solid year. I think it's time to mix it up. It seemed like the most perfect opportunity to catch up on stuff that I've missed. And oh god, that game is very stressful.
That game, yes, it is stressful to say the least because I didn't play it, but I love storytelling and I watched like a lot of people playing it and I watched, the Let's Plays and really delved into it so much that I actually made a YouTube video about the themes behind it. And like that's the only one I've ever made that did not involve The Witcher in any way. Now, obviously, we can't talk too much about it because you haven't finished the game, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll get back with you once you're finished with it. But yes, as I'm playing it, I love the game, but oh my God, it's almost torture at times to get through it. And has that been your experience?
I'm far enough through. I think I'm in like the last. I think if I put it in like another 7 hour stream, I'll be done. And yeah, it's you're sitting there and the emotions. It's stressful. You can't just I'm gonna sit down and play Last of Us 2. You've got to be mentally prepared for it because the storytelling is so graphic. Be it the raw emotion from the bond between people or what like the dramatic events that turn out. And I think there's just not a lot of games that do storytelling that well. Like it's good, but it's not something that sticks with you. And I think something like The Last of Us is one of those games that kind of it's done so well that you always be going, you have to play this. Just as a recommendation.
Yeah, it's almost an experience. The actual like the gameplay and all of that. It's the story, but it's the experience of that story. How do you feel it holds up into the first one? I assume you played the first one?
Played the first one.
Okay.
The first one I like because I was well late to the party with that one, and I ended up playing it, and I went, okay, I get it, I get the hype because any game that is overhyped, I don't trust. I don't trust it. I got burnt by that with Destiny 1, and I was so disappointed with that game.
Yeah,
But
Cyberpunk kind of did that to me like recently.
I think a
Yeah.
lot of people got burned by that,
Yeah.
and I knew when it was coming up. I went I'm always very positive about. I want it to be great. We all want a great experience, and I just went. I don't like where this is going. There was too much hype around it, and then we ended up where we are now, and it's just people trying to put out fires now.
Yeah, and it
But
was impossibly hyped. It's like that it was literally hyped to be, and to me the game is fine. I've only played maybe 8 to 10 hours and I'll probably go back to it once a lot of it gets patched up and maybe they add some things and I have a little bit more time to really experience it. But it just was so hyped up to this game-changing, genre-changing experience and it was just fine. And now it goes the other way. Because people are disappointed with it, they're like, oh, the game's terrible. It's awful. It's like, well, no, it's not that. And I don't like number ratings of games, but it's like, yeah, it's like a 7 out of 10. It's an 8 out of 10. Like, that's good. But a game like that has to be a 10 out of 10 or like an 11 out of 10. And it's almost unhealthy for the games to do this because even The Last of Us 2 was the same thing where hyped, hyped, hyped. It comes out, and if anybody rated that less than a 9 out of 10, they just got like bombarded because like, oh, how can you do this? You're saying this game's so like, no, like 7 out of 10 and 8 out of 10 is good. And so I'm
yeah,
glad to see that The Last of Us 2 has held up for you in that aspect.
yes, it's. I think it's one of those things like as you're talking about consumer expectations are so influenced by the media. And if they tell you it's going to be the best thing since sliced bread, then you tell your friends, and then you tell your friends. even though there's no evidence to back this up, it's just somebody has started talking about it. And I think the difference between Last of Us is The Last of Us had the first game to rest on. Like, that was such an influential game of its time that it was the next game needed to be as good, if not better. And I haven't got far, like, I haven't finished to be able to make that decision. But when you've got a new IP such as Cyberpunk, it's all down to like how they let the media hype it. And one thing that I have been saying for a while is I just think that they revealed it far too early, and it was its own worst enemy in that case.
Yeah, I think it was announced was it 2012 or 2013?
I think it was 2013, and then
Yeah.
they showed the trailer, I believe, in 2014, or at least the teaser. And it was somewhere between 2014 and 2016, but apparently development didn't start till about 2016. And then it's just been a push ever since then. But then, like, because we were looking into it the other day, because we're just thinking, okay, well, we'll see where it goes. Because I must say, I haven't even finished Act 2. I got a certain amount of way through it after a good amount of hours and kind of went, I'm just going to put this down.
There's a
And
lot. Yeah.
it wasn't like anything was detracting me from it. I just kind of, because I actually managed to manage my expectations quite well. And then I went, no, I've just had my fill with this. And I wasn't like making content with it or anything. This was all in my own time. And I just went, no, I'd rather go play something else. And that's how we've ended up with like Last of Us. And I was one of the fortunate souls to be able to get a PlayStation 5. So we did Demon Souls. And there was just other things that had a much bigger interest.
Isn't it so refreshing to play a pretty much linear single player experience after, like, you stream Gwent, like, is it every weekday?
Monday to Friday, yep,
Okay.
every single day. And from about March onwards until now, it's what, January? I
Yeah.
didn't play a single different game on stream until about December.
How long would you stream a day, like, per average, you'd say?
About 4 to 5 hours.
Okay.
At the beginning, I was streaming a lot longer, but then I started going, do you know what? Like, burnout is a real thing. And I just
Yeah.
kind of went, I need to make sure I'm looking after myself, because this, given the state of the world and COVID and lockdown, streaming was more of it kept me in a routine, because I started my 8 a.m. starts pretty much just before lockdown. And it actually kept me in a routine that became beneficial to just keep it up. So, and it was, yeah, and I just stuck with Gwen ever since.
And regardless of the game, but especially a card game and a competitive card game where you're actually trying, to win, to do that every day. And then that alone would be hard enough. But to stream and have to entertain the audience and interact with the audience, to do that for so long, to get into a single player experience, I know that would be a release, because one of my favorite games of all time is Uncharted 4. And what I loved about that was it was about the story. And you went in and you didn't have to open up a map and see a million different icons on there. And people like me that are I don't mean to belittle OCD and say that I'm not in that aspect, but I like things cleaned up. And I opened up Cyberpunk's map and I just saw that, and I literally I was like, oh my God, this is too much. And I couldn't even look at the map anymore because it almost gave me like hives to do it.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's incredibly overwhelming. And so, yeah, to go on and to start, like you said Demon Souls, right?
Yes.
So what's the difference to you in streaming like your Demon Souls and your Last of Us 2 as opposed to something like Gwent?
I find that, because I've been streaming for about 3.5 years, and I've only been streaming card games since March. And to be honest, I've been a 0 to 5 viewer streamer for most of that time until I moved over to Gwent. And Gwent was one of those games that opened up a lot of opportunities for me by just being able to. It's a game that you can play with your community. And I went in, I'd never played a game of Gwent. I think I did 2 matches of the tutorial, and then I started streaming it, and that was it. So I grew with them. And it was one of those things that I find there's the difference between playing a game and playing a streamable game, because say Cyberpunk is a perfect example of what I would define not to be a streamable game.
Yeah.
Because what am I going to do with the community? Sit there and just listen to people talk. That's all you're going to do for a lot of the time, because it's a very dialogue heavy game. With Gwent, you can constantly interact, make connections, and enjoy the moments the game presents, which can be quite bizarre. With a linear story, you're waiting for certain moments, and sometimes it doesn't give you the reaction you want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the downtime also, you can play a card, and as you're waiting, you can interact with that. And then especially with people guessing what's going to play, or what's, what they're going to play and what's going to happen. And yeah, like Gwent is a fantastic streamable game, I'd say, because it is so easy to interact with the audience. And, as you mentioned that you said you were a 0 to 5 viewership. I mean, I was the same way. At times now I still am, because I only go Saturday nights, and it can be, for 30 minutes up to an hour, just a little bit in there. And that key is interacting and, like you said, like entertaining. But as we go to Gwent, you have recently, where we're at right now, because this is going to come out, this episode's going to come out in the future. So we're talking from way in the past. A patch was just released, but there have been no updates since the Way of the Witcher, or no real balance changes, I should say, since Way of the Witcher dropped. And you're going to be taking a little bit of a break from Gwent, like at least this season, correct?
That is the plan, yeah. I feel that it seems like the perfect storm, that there's no balance change. It doesn't feel... I think burnout is an existing thing, and I always tell people playing Gwent, because if you have people that come into your community and all they do is moan and moan, and I just say to them, now's your time to take a break, because playing the same game over and over again is not healthy. And I've done that for nearly a year. Way of the Witch came out, great beginning, and then we saw the cracks. Certain cards were a little bit oppressive or a little bit overtuned, and there's small changes that needed. But then when I went, oh, there's no balance change, I went, okay, I'm just going to take this season off and do games for me. So that's why we moved on to The Last of Us. We finished Demon Souls. I've got Spider-Man Miles Morales lined up, and I'm not even watching streams. I'm not watching YouTube content. I'm just having a complete detachment from it. So when I come back, I'm fresh. When they do the next big balance patch, I believe at the beginning of February, and it doesn't really affect me too much, because I'm not really, when we say like it's a competitive game, but I'm not someone sitting there chasing rank. I enjoy the fun aspect of it rather than trying to make top 500 or top 64 or making the opens. I work weekends, so even if it comes to it, I can't do the opens anyway. But that's not me. I'm not a competitive player. I like to play stuff that's fun, and winning is fun. So you're always trying to figure out what you can make. Like, I enjoy making fun decks that I can go, right, put that together, stick it on YouTube, share it, and then we'll play that. I think my highest MMR was 2477 with monsters, and that's not high at all. But you compare yourself to some of the other names, and they're hitting like 265, and you're just like, oh my god. But that's what they're in it for.
Yeah, it's finding a role, and you're right. There are those highly competitive, those great players, and they have that down. They're going to get the high MMR. They're the highly competitive ones, and people will go to that stream, to find that. Like you said, for yours, and it's why I enjoy your stream, is it's fun. You play what I call jank decks. They kind of hit where it's like we want them to be somewhat competitive, but obviously we're not trying to break any meta here. And that's what I try to do. I actually made like a Marvel themed decks. I try to do lore decks, try to do Witcher lore decks, but I've kind of exhausted
awesome.
that. I've made a Disney deck because when I play with my fiance, it's an easy thing to do there. And then recently did like Marvel themed ones, and like to me that's a ton of fun. is trying to make something somewhat competitive using, goofy cards, because that's where the nonsense happens. And, I try to get those moments again to interact with their community where something really wild happens. And I've seen a couple clips from you, your stream, especially. It was The Last of Us 2 where you jumped right into that trap. Like as soon as you jump in, it's like, oh, the tripwire, that's trap, boom, blows up.
It's kind of, oh no.
Yeah, and those are the moments to really try to hit at. As far as Gwent goes, what is something you want or you would choose or you would like to see from it? And this can be either making it more fun, it can be making more competitive, it can be anything you would want. What is something you're looking for them to do or hoping for them to do?
I I remember when I first started, and I know that games evolve and change. And my first decks to climb with, well, or shall I say climb with, that I played with was a Gurney Thrive deck. And I remember it had Dandelion Poet, and it was just generally quite weird, but it was, like a Thrive deck, you just play your cards and so on, but you could
Point
play
slam,
passively. Yeah. And I like mixed decks that can have a little bit of control and a little bit of passive, but passive just seems to be completely being shoved out the door at the moment, or at least that's how it feels to me. I know the new NR Witches actually seems to get away with it quite well, but they've got the shield buffer to help them. But it also feels like that it's kind of being just put in such a heavy control game that it's all about offense now. And I don't know, I don't really have a solution to it, but maybe this is the direction the game is supposed to go in. I think it might be just the whole, I look back on it last year but now. But I think a bit more overall, a bit more consistency. I feel like this winter has been a bit of an oversight. The Way of the Witcher gave us some amazing cards, and I went, I like this. There's not too many keywords that have been added like we had in Master Mirror, which had, I think, about 8 or 9 keywords added, and this time they're like, here's one, but here's cards that work with it and will change some. It felt more fluid, it felt more accessible. And then just it's like, oh yeah, here's the expansion. It might have some broken stuff, but we're gonna let you have that for 2 months. What do you mean 2 months? Oh, and then you're gonna have a longer season. It feels like there's there's not enough forward thinking with it. And I think if they really want to push the game further, I think there's got to be a bit more forward thinking with it, a bit more planning ahead, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think, and I've only ever played Gwent as far as a card game goes. I've never played, I think I played Hearthstone for literally like 3 or 4 days, and I knew nothing about card games, and I was terrible at it. And then I somehow looked up, I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, The Witcher has one, this thing called Gwent. And I literally started playing Gwent just as a time waste because I was willfully, I should say, unemployed at the time. And then I just got hooked on it and all the Witcher shit that I have to do with that. But it's been I think it's been like 2.5, almost 3 years that I started playing. And I just wonder if the game can be bigger. It can always be bigger, but I mean, I think some people want it to be a Hearthstone killer, or they want it to be something bigger than that. And I just don't think it can be. I also don't think it can be with the support that clearly CDPR is putting towards it, because they seem to be, and again, I don't know enough about it, but this is just my very basic opinion, that Gwent to them is, let's wring as much value out of this we can. Let's put the minimum amount effort into it while getting the most money out of it. Like, it's not about, it's just this extra thing that as long as it breaks even or a little bit more, that's fine. We don't want to invest anymore. We will invest everything into Cyberpunk. And assume the upcoming Witcher sequel, which is all but announced, like they're going to make another one. They have to make another one because they're a large company and shareholders know that's going to be the biggest selling game of all time once that comes out. And I think Cyberpunk was just the biggest selling game. And so that's what I think with Gwent. The support doesn't seem to be there from the company aspect. And I really think like the community managers and like Jason, the lead designer developer, I think they bear so much brunt of that unfairly because they can't say that. They have to just be like, no, no, we're doing this, and no, we have all that. But to me, it seems kind of obvious that
I
they
think
just don't
you're
have it.
right. I think you're right. It feels to a certain degree like a passion project that they're allowed to keep doing to a degree. And I think you need to kind of, I understand from a business point of view because they're trying to earn a certain amount. It's got to earn a certain amount of revenue, but if you don't invest, you won't like give it a good year of let's throw all we've got at it and see what we can come up with. Give them the resources they need, and then they'll be able to make an informed decision. But it also shows, like, say, I don't know. Have you tried Runeterra at all?
I have not. I take it back. I did play a World War II card game called Cards for a little bit back last April to May because history, World War II. I obviously was going to get in that, but I keep hearing about Runeterra and I keep hearing how great it is, but I just can't commit the time to learning another game because it's the only one I've played.
Yeah, it's so time consuming because I
Yeah,
think even God, like even now, I always feel like I'm always learning in Gwent,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
I actively do. Like I play for mostly fun, but there's always something to learn, be it a faction, be it a play style. And I still like I've hardly dabbled with Syndicate, for example, and I know I should, but I just go, oh, I'm kind of happy with what I do. Being a monster main, it's just so much easier to go. Give me my crones, give me my thrive, give me like
Yeah.
the stuff that you like doing, and some of the new ones have been great. And then because I think what was it? I managed to go nearly a whole season without playing NR, and then I made a cows deck because that seemed like the logical choice. But besides that, I didn't want to play like anything normal. But I think from what I hear, like Runeterra is kind of doing the right. They're backing it and they're growing because of it, and they have a bigger community because of it. I don't know the ins and outs. I know the viewership on Twitch is higher for the
Yeah.
most part, but there's also more people streaming it, and we've been toying with the idea of maybe giving it a go. I've watched a little bit and gone, I don't really know it, but I think I have to get stuck in to try it. But it's I think going back to Gwent is always going to be the bread and butter of it because it's the card game that I love the art style, love the gameplay style. I just like to see the future a bit brighter for it, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, no question. And I just feel so bad for like I said, the community employees that have to interact with the community and they just take this. And then again, like today, patch comes out
Oh.
and game breaking bugs. They held off the patch in the start of the season for a week because they found a game breaking bug and they release it. And then there's multiple game breaking bugs. And it's one of those, like, CDPR is a massive corporation. They cannot cry foul. People cannot cry foul that they're this small independent, oh, we're just understaffed. They literally just had Cyberpunk sell all of that. They are swimming in money, all of that. Once the numbers get released for the quarter, especially with earnings and all that, I'm assuming, I know their stock took a hit, like a massive hit, but I'm
Oh,
assuming,
massively.
yeah, but I'm assuming based on when the fourth quarter numbers, all that officially get released, I'm assuming that's going to boost it back up. That's my very basic understanding of economics.
Stocks is never something I've really looked into, so I don't know too much about that. I know Lionheart's the one to talk to about that. I know he's got some stocks in CDPR.
He's actually invested, yeah.
Yeah, he's invested, but he's also very smart with that kind of stuff. So I
Yeah.
think he makes smart decisions. So, but I don't have a clue about it. But I think they're kind of sitting on the whole mountain of awkwardness at the moment because they've got all these lawsuits that are coming from Cyberpunk,
Yeah, the
and
class
then this has
action ones, yeah.
happened, and then it's just a rough start to the year, and hopefully they can save it because we want the only people that benefit from good games are gamers. So let's hope that all comes around. But in the meantime, it's kind of like let them do their thing. So it sort of ventured out into other games and so on. And I think 2021's not looking great for games at the moment,
It's
unfortunately.
yeah, games, I think all media in general, it's going to be really weird because everything gets pushed back and everything now. And you mentioned earlier about how the reaction, how everything gets hyped from the media. And I'm of the opinion that we almost know too much, that the
Yes.
the consumer, us, is this rabid monster and we have to be fed by information. And then every journalist is going to make their name by breaking news or by being the first one. And they'll become, again, they'll get hired and they'll make their name and they'll make their cut off of breaking information. And so they release this information and then we run with it and we know everything about a game, and a game just can't get released. We have to know so much about it. And because of that, everything gets set in advanced years, release dates. Well, now they've been pushed back. So you're going to have to push the other ones back and then push the other ones back. And this is movies as well. And
Yeah, it's getting nuts.
it's almost just going to take years to do that, or everything just has to be rammed together. But then you kind of can't do that because you're competing against each other. And it's I don't know. It's just a absolute mess from all this this year of COVID that's going to be dragged out, I think, into several years.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a knock-on effect for a few years. Like, how's it been for you in general?
Like the COVID.
Yeah,
Well, I teach and coach high school, and so this entire year has been maybe anywhere from a fifth to a tenth of a class in person and then online. And so I'm teaching like this with the camera in front of two screens and teaching to people in the classroom and teaching to people online. And other than that, it's just I'm in a state. The thing about America is it depends on where you're at. We have a lot more control over local governments. So if you're in a state like me, Texas, that is run generally by Republicans, it's going to be very different than a state, say, California, that is run by Democrats. California, New York, your big cities, it's like lockdown. Well, here, you can go, we are not locked down at all. Most places will be like, hey, you have to wear a mask, but it's not like against the law. But even more so, it's done by counties. I live in a county that is generally Republican, but I work in a county, Dallas County, that is generally Democrat. So much of it is different from where I work than when I come home. And it's just an absolute mess. You have a state like Florida that is basically the Wild West. Like there are almost no rules going on there. Like people, there's no
jeez.
social distancing. When you look at like sporting events, some people are just not wearing masks, and it's just it's absolutely wherever you live in this wild ass country.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's scary. Because like, how are the numbers in your area though? Are they high, or would you consider them high?
Every time I look, and I don't really look at them regularly, like the country, it's like a record. It's the record high cases. It's the record high deaths. And like I said, I coach high school basketball. We've had multiple games postponed. Our entire girls team is quarantined for 2 weeks. There's only like 5 teams that have, or 5 schools that have teams in the district. There's usually 8. And it's just every so often, oh, game's canceled. They have to quarantine. Someone had a test. I get an email at least once every day saying, hey, somebody in the school has tested positive. And like it's just the ultimate, let's not pay attention to something and hope it goes away. And we're into month, what, 9 or 10 of it? Because are y'all still in a complete lockdown?
Yep, we're in. So we had our initial lockdown in March. That was countrywide. Then they loosened restrictions, and things slowly had got better. Like lockdown had made its effect, but then people started being able to socialize, and nothing had really been resolved. But then, say my workplace, like I work in a production kind of factory, and they had, they're just telling you to social distance, and nothing had been done until apart from masks. And then eventually, you had these screens appear and everything that, like, I would say I go to my work and generally feel safe because they've taken steps. But it slowly started getting worse again, and like the hospital in my town, which my mum works at, is over half capacity full just COVID. And they're already worrying about if they can be like where the projected numbers is that they're going to fill. And it just keeps going and going and going. But then there's a lot of people going, well, I'm sick and tired of it. It's like you see people walking around because it's mandatory in all supermarkets now to wear a mask. Otherwise, they will turn you away or unless you're exempt because of health reasons or whatever. But you've got to be able to, you can get a badge that basically is like you don't have to ask because
Yeah.
some people don't like talking about it or whatever reason. And they'll have a badge and they can just walk in. So no questions asked, which is fair enough because it's a very small minority that are able like that. But there are people just not social distancing, and it's quite scary. They've shut all the local shops. You're not allowed to they're even stopping click and collect in a lot of places. And we're going to be in this for a while. But we've got the vaccine rolling out, which is we're looking like we might even get a summer of some sorts, but. Luckily, my mum, again, works at the hospital, and she's had the first injection of the vaccine, but I won't see it, like being a 34-year-old healthy male, I won't see it till probably autumn.
Yeah, I think I've got my fiance's sister is a nurse. And so she kind of has, and this is again a very American thing, where you have like a hookup. And usually you get a hookup for, concert tickets or something like that. This is hookup for the COVID vaccine. And I've actually been like, the way America works, I don't trust that our system will be able. I actually feel like there's a finite amount. And I feel like you said there, I'm a healthy 36-year-old. If I get that vaccine, will there be a time when somebody else could have gotten that? Because the rollout of the vaccine in this country has been on par with the release of Cyberpunk. It has been an absolute fucking disaster. It's expiring in places. It's just a mess. And
Really?
we don't have a problem with there are places where hospitals are too full. But the reason we don't have a lot of problem with the hospitals being full is because unlike places like the United Kingdom, we obviously don't have nationalized health care. So a lot of people don't have insurance to go to the hospital when they're sick. So they're just gonna get through it or die.
I've never been able to understand that. Like, it just seems just so throw your people to the wolves unless you're rich.
American capitalism, baby. Rugged individualism.
Like, the NHS here has been an absolute godsend. Like, you go to, I break my arm, I go to the hospital, I have x-rays, I have everything, stick it in the car, send you home, give you all the therapy, and I will pay nothing, not a single penny. Whereas in America, it's like thousands upon thousands of dollars that you'll probably either spend the rest of your life trying to pay off.
That would be something literally as little as a broken bone with x-rays, like having to go to the hospital. Because we have a lot of these called doc in a box, like neighborhood doctors, where you go for the little stuff. I know. That's where you go when you have like an upper respiratory infection or like a flu or something bad like that. But if it was something where you actually had to go to the hospital, like something as dumb as breaking your arm, that's easily tens of thousands of dollars. And you're right. Then you're then in debt for something like that. Do y'all get checks, like monthly checks from the government, like COVID relief?
So what they've done, I'm fortunate enough that I have not been. They've been doing a furlough scheme. So if your work can't keep you employed in the current thing, they will pay you 2/3 of your wage. And the idea is that your employer tops that up. Employers aren't topping it up. So, but
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough that like in my place, because you have a lot of what we call like temporary staff. So you've got agency, they come in and then you've got permanent staff who work for the company directly. And I'm one of the people that work directly. And all they did is got rid of all the agency staff and said, we'll see you in a couple of months. And so but we're not getting any financial support outside of that. So I pretty much worked through the lockdown, but I can't really say much. I work 2 days a week.
So does that, because I think Canada, I think they get a flat amount. I think like everybody's getting a flat amount. Is is the reason why maybe y'all don't have that flat amount because of who's in power? Like,
It's never. I don't think it matters who's in power, because
okay,
when it comes to politics in England, it's very much. I'm not someone that is very well educated on politics, so it's one of those things that I would say is the rich keep the rich rich and they keep the poor poor. It doesn't matter which party's in power. They say they're for the people. I can't remember which government it was. They came into power, and all they'd been promising as one of their big selling points is we're gonna like slash university fees like by half. And within 2 weeks, they made them higher. It's just straight up that kind of way our system works. And like, for instance, they made a boost to our benefit systems called the universal credit, which is your rent, your what we call job seekers, and everything that bundles together if you're unemployed. And they're in the middle of the pandemic talking of cutting it. So you'll have less money when it already is not enough money to live on. But they've got 2 houses and they've got to pay 10 grand for their expenses, but that's okay.
yeah,
So
because I believe the party that's been in power in England has been the Tories, the Conservative Party,
yes,
and in the United States, which everybody in the world is almost privy to the United States because of the cultural hegemony and just the fact that we have our claws everywhere around the world. But the last 4 years, the generally conservative or conservative Republican Party has been in power. Well, that changes in literally 2 days. Actually, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be completely flipped. And so our quote unquote left leaning party, they're not, will be in full power. And so everything that people have complained about saying, oh, we can do this, oh, we can do this, they can do it. So I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. And I don't have the most confidence in them, but we won't have the insanity that we've had the last 4 years.
Yeah, from the outside, honestly, America has looked like it's been an absolute mess because you've had Trump in power.
And y'all have Boris Johnson, that's his name, right?
Yes, he looks like a Muppet.
And that's what I mean. Y'all have him in power. And y'all can at least look at America and be like, well, at least we don't have him.
That's kind of been it, really.
It's such a low bar.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, you look at like how the one thing I will say about how they've handled this last year is they're doing the best they can, but they're also making some mistakes far too late. But they're not as dramatic as mocking Korea,
Yeah.
or just spouting absolute nonsense. And then you had the recent issues where people were storming the
coup, the Capitol, literally where laws are made. Yeah,
like you try that in England, Jesus Christ, that wouldn't happen. That just wouldn't happen.
Well,
it wouldn't even get that far.
It wouldn't have happened in America if any other group besides the group that did it. If those would have been like the Black Lives Matter protesters, like the people who were protesting in the summer, if they would have done it, there would have been a massacre. Like it never would have gotten that far because they would have been tear gassed and beaten before they even got near the Capitol. So that a big reason why that happened was who was doing it, and I think that's the biggest shock to a lot of people is how in the world do people get into? I mean, it's literally someone stole the Speaker of the House's podium.
I saw the picture of that guy and I just went, oh my God.
He stole the podium. There was a guy with his feet up on the desk of the Speaker of the House. And for people not familiar with the United States, the president is at the top. If something happens to the president, it's the vice president who takes over. If something happens to the vice president, I'm pretty sure it's the Speaker of the House next in power, like will become president. Like Speaker of the House is theoretically the most powerful person in the country because that's who's making the laws per se. So the president will always have their executive power, but that's the Speaker of the House. And their podium was stolen and their desk, this guy's putting his feet up in their desk. And it would be so funny in a way, and this is where I don't try to trivialize it, but how can you not laugh at it? The absurdity.
I think that's it, is the absurdity of it, because it just makes them look like a shambles. The fact that these people managed to get in and do that, and honestly, it feels like a meme has just been posted all over the internet of just these silly pictures with silly people doing silly things in what should be like a place of making laws and seriousness and trying to make a difference to
The
people's
halls
lives.
of democracy, right? America leads the world and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you see that. And honestly, like people would have been shot and like, well, I don't know about shot. I don't know how they would have dealt with it in England,
Yeah.
but they definitely wouldn't have stood for it. And you wouldn't see Parliament get stormed.
It just wouldn't happen.
You wouldn't even get
there.
that far.
Yeah. It just absolutely wouldn't happen there. Okay, let's we're gonna try to bring it on down a little bit more levity here, and I try not to get too insane by the situation over here. What do you like to do outside of streaming, content creation, all of that? Like outside of screen, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Honestly, I spent the last few years mostly just because where I do 2 days a week at work, and then I've got the 5 days. I spend most of the time just doing content creation. But I've started because I spent a few years just being a bit of a hermit because I went, right. I decided sobriety was an idea to take up. So I went 2.5 years without drinking at all. And my normal thing is to go out to concerts, live music, be a bit more social and stuff like that. But I decided, like, for my own mental health, I was like, right, we need to, because I suffered quite heavily with anxiety. And I just went, right, let's just sort of bring it in a bit. And I I went through this whole sobriety kind of thing. And then like last, not summer just gone, summer before, I went to the Download Festival and I was like, do you know what? Now's the time to drink. And now it's just all about like, all I wanted to do was, right, we'll get out to these live events, we'll go to concerts, did 6 months of that. And then lockdown hit.
Yeah.
But just I honestly, my main thing is just hitting live music. Like I don't really go out. I don't go down the pub and I don't party and drink all the time and that. Like I think this year, last year, I had 3 beers during the summer, bottles of beers, not like whole sessions, and then a few drinks on Christmas Day. But there's no evidence of that.
Yeah. I see the Slipknot there. Is that your band?
Oh yeah, they were the ones that started it all. For me, it's like I've always been like, once I sort of discovered, at the time in, I think it was about 2001, it was like Slipknot, and I just kind of stuck in the rock alternative kind of genre. And I think first concert was Slipknot, and I just never stopped after that. It became a bit of an addiction. There was me and my mates every week looking for a new concert, be it a small gig, big gig, whatever we could do. And we just carried on doing it. And even all these years later, it's just something like, you just can't get enough.
How many concerts do you think you've been to?
Well over 200, maybe even more than 300. I have no scale on it. I know there's like Slipknot I've seen, say, at least 4 times. I've seen like a couple of other bands like 5, 6 times each. And just because it's like, oh, I haven't seen them in a couple of years, they've come around, let's go see them. And I've been to like Download Festival. I went like 5. No, I've been 6 times. And I was planning on going last year, but that obviously fell through.
Yeah.
And for me, I think there's nothing better than like being able to go to a concert like that and just let it all out. Like even at my age, because you kind of think, oh, it's a young man's game and everything.
Exactly.
You can still go there and have fun without going completely nuts, and it's quite refreshing for me.
Yeah, there's a different experience of a lot of things from your 20s into your 30s.
Yeah.
So are you around London?
I used to live in London. I'm about 2 hours outside of London.
Okay.
And I'm about 2 hours outside of there, but I spent 4 years living in there. I went up there to work in basically setting up concerts. Never been musically inclined, so I went, okay, I pursued a few things around my area and then just kind of went, let's go to London, do a few years there, see how it goes. And I ended up working, like setting up for big gigs at like the O2 Arena and many of the other big venues around there for a company. It was more like being a bit of an extra hand, not really too trained, but it's a great way to meet people, make contacts.
Yeah.
And then I ended up suffering an injury, so that kind of put an end to that.
Okay. Yeah, and it helps. Again, going back to y'all have very good, I think, like public transportation. And where I'm at, because I'm in a suburb of Dallas, I'm in like the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, so major city. A lot of people obviously going to come through, play concerts there. And there's a massive football stadium, Cowboy Stadium in Arlington, which was about several miles from the university that I coached at. But the suburb I'm at right now, they're the nearest quote public. There's no public transportation. Like there's not. I'd have to drive to a a rail stop, and then take that rail to some little bit of stops that might be in Dallas. So I can't just go easily do that. And you said you've been to hundreds of concerts. I have been to 3 concerts like ever. And the first one I went to was Metallica and Godsmack.
Oh, that sounds like a lineup.
It was the Saint Anger tour. So that would have been like 05, 06.
Yeah, that would have been around about then.
Yeah, so I saw them, and then I went to San Antonio and I saw Rush.
Oh God, I bet that was a show and a half.
Yeah, it was, but they had just released some album around that time. I can't remember what it was called. This would have been it's only back in college, 06, 07. But yeah, I've always been classic rock. My dad was oldies, so I grew up in the 90s. All that was playing was the oldie station here. So like my first CD that I ever got was Creedence Clearwater Revival with CCR. And so I was all 60s, 70s. Like Zeppelin was my favorite band in high school. And then like I loved Rush and Queen. And so like I got into a lot of this, like the classic rock. And I remember in high school, like you said, like Slipknot. I remember my friends like Limp Bizkit and Korn and all the new metal. And I am on the record for this, that I knew that now Korn, I'm sorry, Slipknot isn't in that same metal. They're not new metal. But like all of that time now, because kids will ask me, they'll be like, man, I want to go back to like the 90s. I'm like, no.
The
Like that
90s was
music of the
awful
late
for metal.
90s, so much of it was just awful. Like there's a reason why you don't hear it.
Yeah, it was really bad. It was like because you had the new metal phase sort of came in at the very tail end of '99
Mm-hmm.
when Limp Bizkit, Korn, and at the time you like Slipknot kind of got thrown in with them for the beginning of the 2000s, and then you ended up with like Drowning Pool and other kind of like new metal
Disturbed.
bands. Yeah, Disturbed and
Yeah.
Soil, and they were all kind of they weren't new metal, but they all got thrown with a banner and it all just chucked into it because it's it was all very much like early 2000s was good, but the 90s, unless you really like Limp Bizkit and Korn and 90s Metallica, you didn't really have much to go with.
Yeah, like even like Metallica, I remember that being a big thing because I got into them very late. Because like I said, I was all classic rock, 60s, 70s, even maybe some into the 80s. And when I got into Metallica was when I borrowed like a CD, that ancient way of playing music. And I think it was like 2001. And I listened to them from the beginning because this guy I knew was like a huge Metallica fan. And I got to experience that change of listening to Kill 'Em All and like the thrash, and then going into Ride the Lightning and Justice, and then hitting like the Black Album, and then
Yeah.
understanding people are just like, oh yeah, there's the Black Album of Metallica, which is probably the most popular, and it was like that shift after that, and then understanding like, oh yeah, being one of those people like, oh, I like Metallica. Back in like the 80s, before they sold out and whatnot. And it's just, I got to experience that so much later than everybody, which I tend to do with a lot of stuff, I guess I've come to learn.
Yeah, I think because to be honest, I kind of did something similar. Like I wasn't really musically inclined, and then once I hit Slipknot, and then I went into that kind of genre, and then somebody would be talking to me about what was it somebody asked for? They were like, oh, ask for Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, or something like that. I can't remember because we were at a club and they were like,
Yeah.
I'll go request that. I didn't know which one was the band name. I was so out of like touch with actual classic rock kind of stuff that I just didn't even know. And as I got older, I actually delved more towards the classic rock, like you're saying, like your Zeppelins, ZZ Top, AC/DC, and just sort of went more that way. So I still listen to like the metal kind of stuff, but if I throw some tunes on, it will be the classic rock kind of stuff. So it's like the older I've got, the older my taste has got. So it's gone more to the 80s and 70s,
Yeah.
which is Creedence Clearwater as well. Like a big fan of them. And some of the best shows I've seen have been like, I remember watching ZZ Top in 2009 at a festival and just went, this is brilliant.
Yeah, ZZ Top. I think ZZ Top. I'm pretty sure they're from Texas.
I think that I think they're definitely Southern American. I think they are Texas, but
I'm pretty sure because Lagrange is one of their songs, and there's a Lagrange, Texas, and I always remember them it just being like, Texas, like Texas rock. Wait a minute, we're country, and like, the Texas musical landscape is like when people love music, Austin is like renowned for being a music like site. Austin city limits was a big thing. I think as Austin's gotten bigger and more corporate, it's gotten a little bit less of its weirdness. Like keep Austin weird was like a slogan they had. And Texas is obviously a big state. Austin is, I want to say, maybe a little over 3 hours away, which may seem like a long time to people, but that's really not that far here because you have places like El Paso that are over 10 hours away. So yeah, it's not
given
too
the size
far.
of America. Like if I want to drive because I'm in the far south of England. If you want to drive from like here to the top of England, you're looking at like probably doing 12 hours.
Okay.
It's not a big country at all.
And that's like you can almost drive 12 hours here. You actually can if you live in the east of Texas or the west and you go all the way to El Paso, which is the far western tip. Like that's over 12 hours. And like it's closer to Florida where I am than it is to El Paso in Texas. So yeah, America is just it's too damn big.
15 hours.
So it's 15.
15. Still wasn't wrong, but far off. But
yeah,
that like it's compared to America, it's absolutely just not that far. Like
yeah,
we could just plop us in Texas and be like, okay, that made a little dent.
yeah, and that's a weird thing too. Also with the football teams, the soccer over here, but the football teams, they bus everywhere, right? Like they don't fly, like in the Premier League, right?
Yeah, they don't need to fly. Not around England anyway.
Yeah, and that's like in here, and I don't know if you can call it. Everybody flies here. Our collegiate teams like fly everywhere. The better off college teams in the NCAA, like their sports will fly everywhere. And my fiance played college volleyball at Arkansas, a major school, and they flew everywhere, chartered flights. Even if it would have been, a 3 or 4 hour bus ride, no, they're just gonna charter a flight. Because
probably easy though, like especially if you're doing like into country flights.
Yeah,
because I think the nearest airport to me is Southampton, and that would be a 40-minute drive, I reckon, from where I am. And then from there, like the only place you would even consider flying to would be Scotland, and that will take you not long at all.
So how far is it? How far is it from there to say? Because Liverpool is more south than Manchester, right?
They're not far off each other in the grand scheme of things.
Well, how far a drive do you think that would be?
I can actually tell you because we drove from London to a festival right near Liverpool.
Okay.
And including the getting lost time, because we did take a long detour that went. A friend was distracting me and we went the wrong way. We missed our turning and then we ended up at Stonehenge. It was
that's a very English
totally
story.
The wrong way. Yeah, it was.
We got lost and ended up at Stonehenge.
Yeah, and I think the drive itself is about like 5 to 6 hours.
Okay.
And that's if you just keep going.
Yeah. All right. Yeah,
that's what it felt like anyway.
That'd definitely be a flight here. Yeah.
Here, it's like actually flying from here to Manchester. I think it's just really expensive as well. It's like intercity. Because then also we need the car because the place we were going was in the middle of nowhere, basically. It was what you call a holiday camp. And it's about 2,000 people and it all has little, we call them chalets. They're like hotels.
Yeah.
You have your own little apartments for a couple of days, but you go to Manchester, then you got to go from there to Liverpool, and then from Liverpool to there. So it was just easier to drive all round. But people just don't do flying that much really here. Like my dad, he worked for energy companies, and he used to do like 6 to 7, sometimes 6 hour drive in a day, just
Jeez.
going up for meetings.
Man, yeah, the commutes. I hate traffic. The school I worked at last year was like a 30 to 40 minute one-way commute, and it was gonna put me in the grave. I just absolutely could not stand it. It was
It's not,
oof.
it's not worth it.
No,
Not.
it's absolutely awful.
I
All
do
right.
12-hour shifts, and like it takes me sometimes going to and from work. We get like a bus service provided, and it can, like, you've got the 12 hours, and then you've got about half-hour drive on either side. Anything more than that, and it's just too much.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love listening to podcasts as much as anybody, but there's only and I have a hybrid car too, so I get very good gas mileage. And I just yeah, I don't know. The driving is just it's a bit much. Like I said, it's just not worth it. But
Mm.
and thank you for joining today, man. This was a blast. Make sure to check out YouTube, Twitter, Twitch links below. Again, you're streaming every day. Put out that YouTube content. A lot of fun stuff in the future to come, and excited to be a part of the same team.
Yes, so I appreciate having the opportunity for us to make this happen, and the invite. It's been an absolute pleasure hanging out, my friend.
All right, yeah, no, anytime, and we'll definitely hook it back in the future, definitely for some other Gwent related things. But as always, we have our guests leave the audience with words of wisdom, just anything they'd like to say. And again, as usual, I stall for time here to give you a little bit more time to maybe think of it. So lay it on us.
The bit of advice that I would say is I've done many things in my life that people would consider a little bit out there, but always try. Anything is possible.